Good evening, everyone. My name is Jean-Pierre Brutus. I am a senior counsel at the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. I lead the Institute's reparations work, and I am the convener of the New Jersey Reparations Council. We welcome you to the third public session of the New Jersey Reparations Council, hosted by the Faith and Black Resistance in New Jersey Committee. Thank you for joining us. I want to let you all know that this meeting is being recorded and live streamed on YouTube. Press is in attendance to listen only. Closed captioning is available for anyone who needs it. Just hit the button. In the first part of this session, the committee will discuss their work on faith and Black resistance in New Jersey, and the second half of the session will be the public comment portion. This is the third of 9 public sessions of the council. The fourth session will be hosted by by Health Equity Committee on February 8th. So please be on the lookout for the flyer. You can go to njreparationscouncil.org for more information. You can find videos of the first public session hosted by the History of Slavery in New Jersey Committee, as well as the second public session hosted by the Segregation New Jersey Committee. I would now like to introduce my colleague, the CEO and President of the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, Ryan Haygood, who will give you an overview and mandate of the council.
Thank you, Jean-Pierre, and thank you so many for the third public session of the first council led, as Jean-Pierre chaired, by the Faith and Black Resistance Committee. I want to thank our partner, Maisha Simmons, who now serves as the Assistant Vice President for Equity and Social Justice at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, for making this work possible. And you'll hear more from Maisha shortly. Tonight's discussion will feature remarks from committee co-directors, Reverend Timothy Atkins Jones and Reverend Charles F. Boyer, along with other committee members, Reverend Carol Patterson, Dr. Stephanie James Harris, and Imam Dean Sharif, in a discussion that will be moderated by our co-director, Professor Tajania Henderson. We will then open up the public comment session portion of tonight's program. The question that we often get is, why convene the New Jersey Reparations Council? And the answer is that although slavery shaped every aspect of New Jersey, there are too many who believe that it actually never happened here, and that racial inequality is not a New Jersey issue. But as many of you know, and as you'll hear more about tonight, New Jersey's original sin of slavery and its lasting stain tell a vastly different story. Co-chaired by Tajania Henderson and Khalil Gibran Muhammad, and comprised of local, state, and national experts, the New Jersey Reparations Council is finally confronting and working to repair the enduring harm from New Jersey's deep and often overlooked institution of slavery and its enduring impact on the contemporary life of Black people in our state. Because these inequalities have been reinforced by generations of policy design, not by individual behaviors, they must be repaired by design. The council's work will be not only to propose bold, strategic policies to repair that enduring harm to Black people from slavery, but it will also answer this foundational question. And that is, what kind of reparative system does New Jersey need to build and invest in for Black people here to finally be free? Free to thrive, free to win. Our affirmative vision for the council is that they think boldly and imaginatively and propose solutions that will both, one, compensate the descendants of enslaved Black people and their communities for lost wages, and two, address the structural racism at its core through reparative policies and investments that are commensurate and proportional to the enduring harm from slavery and what followed. And on Juneteenth, 2025, the council will produce a report that will draw direct connections between New Jersey's history and its present and propose comprehensive policy recommendations that will, on their own, serve as a blueprint for how New Jersey can repair the enduring harm from slavery and also act as a vast resource to the reparations task force that New Jersey will ultimately create, Reverend Boyer, through law, thanks to the ongoing advocacy of our faith allies for reparations partner. And as we look ahead to the council's work, it is both thrilling and daunting. We know that the only way to building a new New Jersey is through. We are convinced that every moment for racial justice requires fierce and independent advocates to lift their voices when others won't. We're also convinced that the New Jersey Reparations Council, building on the decades-long fight in this state, will help move the issue of reparations from unsafe, unpalatable, and impossible to inevitable and conventional wisdom. We thank you for joining us tonight and for standing with us. And I'm now pleased to pass the mic to our partner, Maisha Simmons. Welcome, Maisha.
Thanks, Ryan. I'm honored to be a member of the council and to speak with you all tonight. My colleagues and I at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation are steadfastly committed to achieving health equity in New Jersey, which means that everyone who calls our state home has a fair and just opportunity to live their healthiest life possible. Yet the current reality is that there are large, persistent, and increasing gaps in opportunities for health and well-being across neighborhoods and communities, depending on who you are and where you live. In 2021, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention declared racism a public health issue, affecting the health and the well-being of millions of people directly. As the nation's largest philanthropy dedicated to health, we deeply believe in dismantling structural racism and the barriers that millions face every day simply because of their race or their intersectionality with other groups that experience oppression. As a funder of the council, the foundation is clear in our stance that the time has come for New Jersey to create a shared understanding of the harms caused to Black New Jerseyans over the past 4 centuries and embark on a process to remedy these injustices. We all have a responsibility and the ability to achieve health equity by striving for racial equity and treating the root causes of disparities. To do this right requires a great deal of research, planning, and public dialogue. Since 2021, RWJF has funded efforts to learn from the global experience and impact of reparations, learn how reparations could close the racial health and wealth gaps that persistently impact Black Americans and Indigenous people, and strengthen the reparations field directly by supporting organizing efforts, capacity building, and technical assistance in building towards federal, state, and/or local policy action. Now the foundation is funding the council to serve as a leading edge of efforts to convene a non-governmental process to initiate the necessary work. We see the council's work as a critical precursor to achieving justice that our governments own Black New Jersey. Together, we have an opportunity to set a national example by addressing structural racism in a thoughtful and comprehensive manner. Our commitment to do so is rooted in our dedication to health, equity, and justice. My colleagues and I are proud to be on this journey and eager to engage in the hard work it requires. I'm excited about the crucial discussions we will have this evening. And with that, I turn it over to Jean-Pierre. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maisha, and thank you, Ryan. It is now my honor to introduce one of the co-chairs of the New Jersey Reparations Council, Dean Tajania Henderson. Dean Tajania Henderson serves as the Dean of the Graduate School at Rutgers University, Newark, where she is also a professor at Rutgers Law School. Her scholarship focuses on the historical impact of punishment regimes on property systems in the US, and she is particularly interested in the legal histories of incarceration and chattel slavery. Please welcome Dean Tajani Henderson.
Thank you, Jean-Pierre. It is wonderful to be here in fellowship this evening with all of you. As Jean-Pierre indicated, I am Tajania Henderson, but I am probably the least most important person on this panel. I would love to take this opportunity to introduce our committee and also share a little bit about this council's mandate. This is the third public meeting that will be hosted by the New Jersey Reparations Council. And I think it's important for us to remember that the mission of this council is to confront and repair, to confront New Jersey's slaving history, to confront New Jersey's history of Jim Crow and anti-Black racism in the late 19th, early 20th century, and how that has continued to impact Black life to this day, to really confront what it means to explore reparations in a jurisdiction-wide context. And in addition to this confrontation, to this confronting of this history, we are also here to work on repair. The confronting is happening first, and that's part of our discussion today. This Committee on Faith and Black Resistance is charged with examining the historical role of faith and spirituality as filtered through Black spiritual practices and religious organizations, and how those two pillars, faith and spirituality, play in calls for reparations in New Jersey. Here, we are as interested in the history of religious organizations' involvement in slavery and the slave trade as we are in exploring the ethical and faith-based mandate for religious institutions and organizations to pursue reparations for slavery here in the state. So our mission here on this committee is twofold, and as our mission on the larger council is twofold. We are confronting and repairing here as well. It is my pleasure to be joined today by our committee. Our two committee co-directors, Reverend Timothy Atkins-Jones. Reverend Atkins-Jones is pastor of the historical Bethany Baptist Church right here in Newark. Reverend Charles Boyer, who is pastor of Greater Mount Zion AME Church there in Trenton, and the founder of Salvation and Social Justice, which is a nonpartisan Black faith-based public policy organization. We are also joined by Rabbi Joel Abraham, who's a rabbi at Temple Shalom there in Scotch Plains, by Reverend Carol Patterson, who's a chief evangelism officer at Setting the Captives Free Ministries, and Dr. Stephanie James Harris, who's the former executive director of the New Jersey Amistad Commission. The Amistad Commission was a state-mandated educational initiative to include African-American historical context, including the history of chattel slavery and the transatlantic slave trade into the state's K-12 educational curriculum. And finally, Imam Dean Sharif, who's the convener of the Council of Imams here in New Jersey, and as well a member of the state's Coalition of Religious Leaders. Before you hear from them, though, we would love to share a brief excerpt of a film that was produced on this very topic, on the forgotten story of New Jersey's enslaved people. My colleagues here will be teeing up a video, The Price of Silence, The Forgotten Story of New Jersey's Enslaved People, which is available to you, and we will also be sharing information about where you can find this film to show to your families, among your friends, and also to young people that may be in your lives. It's available for viewing. And with that, we will tee up the video.
New Jersey was the last northern state to even attempt to abolish slavery, and was probably the northern state with the strongest sympathies towards the South. Because it was the southernmost northern state, it had a lucrative trade policy with the southern states.
New Jersey's known as the Garden State. We're known for our blueberries. We're known for our corn. We're known for our peaches. But we're not known for the slaves that were here tilling the soil. We're not known for the whole history of slavery connected to New Jersey and how slavery was the underpinning of much of the wealth of New Jersey.
The colony of New Jersey was founded for prosperity purposes, and the concessions agreement of 1664 actually awarded settlers for the number of enslaved people that they had. So they could, depending upon the value of that enslaved person, could inherit anywhere between 40 and 150 acres of free land.
It was in New Jersey's Constitution that Black people, were property of the state.
legislature then sitting at Princeton seemed to be of the opinion that there was something very inconsistent in contending for liberty under an appeal to heaven, and at the same time selling the bodies and service of human beings into perpetual bondage. So the legislature debated Prime's petition. They ultimately passed a special act of the Assembly, which they titled an act for setting free Negro Prime. So Prime was ultimately freed by this act of the legislature.
I can only imagine what it was like to get that bill through. As a sponsor of many pieces of legislation that prohibits human trafficking, this puts me in that mind frame where an individual was actually in bondage, freed, served the country, came back, still could not be free, told he had to work in public service, so you're still an indentured servant just because of the color of your skin. It's appalling, it's hurtful, it's traumatizing to know that the generation suffered and had to find someone who had a heart, who was compassionate, to care about their humanity for the legislature to move and act.
Thank you so much to our colleagues at Just Strategies who were able to do that up for us. Much appreciated. We thought that the video would help to set the tone, one for New Jersey's history, New Jersey's involvement in the institution of slavery, what slavery looked like here, particularly how the state legislature acted over and over again to maintain slavery, even well after the 13th Amendment was ratified. New Jersey refused to ratify that amendment. New Jersey held on to slavery as long as it could. This, we think, helps to sort of set the foundation for a conversation about faith and Black resistance, sort of what are the involvement of our faith organizations? What were denominations doing during slavery? Why is this a relevant conversation? And sort of what's the obligation today to look at that history from a faith-based perspective? To get us started today, we have Reverend Boyer. Reverend Boyer, you have our first question. and the question is what I literally just said. How does faith and Black resistance play a larger discussion, a role in the larger discussion of reparations nationally, but particularly here in the state of New Jersey?
Thank you, Madam Dean, for the question, for your leadership. Thank you to the Institute for their gracious, powerful leadership, and I'm just honored to be part of this discussion. I really appreciate that question because I feel like this committee in particular serves a really unique role, and one like no other in this whole discussion that's going around about reparations. This committee and how we're looking at things really tackles this truth that is often not talked about. The fact that the state and private individuals were not the only nefarious actors and beneficiaries in the slave trade and Black misery. There was a historical role organized religion played in the supporting of the slave trade. So whether that's the Presbyterian Church, the Episcopal Church, the Lutheran Church, the Catholic Church, many religious educational institutions like seminaries, many others all benefited from enslaved labor in some way. And whether it was members of clergy or the churches themselves owning enslaved Black people, or the churches receiving taxes and tithes from congregants in the form of crops farmed and by enslaved people or money earned by slave holders. The wealth of these churches, which they still benefit from today, these denominations, these beautiful cathedrals, and these endowments which are in place, which keep many of them alive, is inextricably intertwined with the slave trade. And this is not only nationally and globally, but New Jersey being one of the oldest states, those original colonies. And when you look around New Jersey, some of the oldest faith institutions and denominations in the country are right here in New Jersey. But at the same time, as these institutions both benefited and contributed to the slave trade and adopted all kind of theologies to justify it, it was also in the spirit of Black resistance, the historical role that Black faith and Black religion played in pushing back. I am a proud AME, and the whole reason I am an AME, because the African Methodist Episcopal Church is a living testament to Black religious resistance. Our church exists as the country was coming into existence as we know now, during the whole time of the founding fathers and slavery at its heights, was the emergence of the African Methodist Episcopal Church in response to slavery. And this is emerging out of Philadelphia and all over Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. And so the oldest Black churches in the country are right here in and amongst where we live here in New Jersey. I serve Greater Mount Zion, and Trenton is one of those. These churches emerge in order to support the Underground Railroad, many of them being parts of the station. The Free African Society is the precursor to the AME Church. The church schools were formed within these churches to teach literacy when we were not allowed to read. New Jersey is home to many of these oldest religious bodies. And another piece that I think is really important is that you got so many Black Methodists and Black Baptists here in New Jersey and throughout the country, is because those particular theologies, and there were freedoms within those churches, within those denominations and religions that spoke to Black people. There was a place where we could hear that we were somebody. Methodism in particular, and John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, was an abolitionist and called slavery a moral villainy. And these are things that resonated with enslaved Black people and why they latched on to these religions. And so finally, as I wrap up here, as we explore, and why I'm so excited about this committee and to serve with these brilliant people of faith and scholarship on this committee, as we unravel all of this and unpack this within our context here in New Jersey, we also will explore, what does that repair look like? And not merely just from the state, we will look at, what does that look like from some of these religious bodies that profited from the slave trade? Does that look like endowments? Does that look like building funds? Does that look like social impact dollars? All of these things that historically Black denominations have been unable to do and are in comparison in poverty to these same entities, to their sister entities and churches, which have enormous wealth in comparison, mostly because they benefited from the slave trade. So I'm proud to be here. I'm excited about it and looking forward to it. And thank you so much for including me.
Thank you, Reverend Boyer. That was exactly what I was hoping you would bring to us today. So thank you. I think it's helpful to remind ourselves and our public that when we talk about religious denominations and organizations benefiting from, that's the word used, benefiting from or supporting slavery, we are speaking broadly from the ownership of human bodies and human property to accepting tithes that are created by the hands of enslaved people. This is a range of culpable behaviors, a range of supporting behaviors. And there will be folks who are thinking, I never thought about church tithes on the backs of enslaved people as being the church supporting slavery. Now is the time for us to think about that and to talk about that, particularly in the more rural areas of the state and during a period when most of the state was rural. This is critical. So thank you so much. Next up, I want to ask our colleague and committee member, Dr. Stephanie James Harris. Dr. James Harris, I am in the same vein. I am really hoping that you can talk to us specifically about some of the historical evidence of the direct link between the codified enslavement of first African people and then folks that would come to be known as African American people right here in New Jersey, and the establishment and expansion of the church as a sort of revered institution here in the nation.
So first, I want to thank you for allowing me to be part of this committee. I'm really thrilled to be able to lend to this conversation and to give a historical lens to the reality of this very important work this committee is doing. I think it's very important that we are able to do the linkages to history. History always tells us the truth. Sometimes we do not want to see them. Sometimes we are not purposeful and intentional about looking for them, but they are always there. And I think to the answer, most especially for this committee's work, the histories and legacies of the ways in which the church as an institution moves forward and sort of in silo and also in tandem with the development of this nation and its government structure is extremely important. You know, we look right now and we are sometimes so entrenched with the ideology of the separation of church and state without understanding that that has not always been the case, and that they grew in tandem in this nation. You know, in the last couple of years, everybody has been looking specifically to the year of 1619. And I want to go back to the year 1619 myself for the purposes of this conversation and to actually kind of prove as an example why there is a direct linkages between the growth of enslavement, the codification of enslavement of this in this nation, especially the British North American colonies, and in tandem the growth of the church. In 1619, there's a couple of things that happened, two of them in tandem. It represents a landmark year in the long history of enslavement in European colonies, the beginning stages of what would become the institution of slavery in North American British colonies. In the summer of 1619, in the colony of Virginia, two major events interlocked with long-standing ramifications for African diaspora people that would later be codified under enslavement in this nation. And although I'm pointing specifically to Virginia, I want you all to understand that Virginia's becomes almost the test case for what happens and what is repeated in each individual colony. And so the laws that I'm specifically stipulating and I'm codifying for you are in Virginia first, but they are repeated in tandem in New Jersey and in all of the 13 colonies. The first one is in July 30th, actually, of 1619, the first event. It becomes the initial meeting of the General Assembly convened in the choir loft. I want you to think about that, of the First Jamestown Church. That assembly was consistent of the governor, his council, and elected representatives from all over the settled areas of Virginia. The colony at that point had been working and had become solidified for almost 10 years. The assembly marked the beginning of representative government. Think about that, the beginning of representative government in this church, based on English law and political institution in which now has become the United States of America. In tandem, 1 month later, in August of 1619, the colony saw the beginnings of the barbaric trade in human lives with the introduction of the 20 and odd kidnapped and illegally exported Angolans from the capital city of Luanda that were traded for corn to this colony off two pirate ships, the White Lion and the Treasurer. These captured Angolans entered the colony in a quasi-indentured servant class that would later be codified into race-based chattel enslavement. And they were utilized for their agricultural expertise and divided among the homes of the members of the General Assembly. Those that were in the General Assembly were the same people that were benefiting from these stolen Angolans and their agricultural expertise. One of the very first acts that this assembly does was a proposition in which to equalize the financial support for this new representative government. and the church. Therefore, they instituted and imposed in March in 1623 a tax of 10 pounds of tobacco levied upon every male head above 16 years of age, now living. Colonists who owned land and those who worked the ground paid tithes to the government as an early form of income tax, something we need to understand. So we all understand the ideology of income tax, but these tithes were the income tax. In the 17th and 18th century Virginia, and also as expanded as a practice across the rest of the 13 colonies, including New Jersey, the term tithable referred to a person who paid or for whom someone else paid one of the taxes imposed by the General Assembly with the support of three entities: the civil government that it was being constituted, the local religious institutions in the colony, and the counties that were being formulated. The tax was levied in three parts: the colony, the county, and the parishes. The majority of the tax in equal amounts was collected to defray the expense of each county and parish. And the amount of the tax was set annually and independently by the county and the parish, which means the parish could determine how much money it needed to grow and institute a levy on the tax. Tithes to the church, county, and government were paid in corn and tobacco, which could then be codified into profits for their growth. As the population grew with the addition of indentured servants, enslaved people, working women, and non-citizens, it eventually became necessary to define more clearly who would be taxed and how those taxes would be levied. At the same time, counties and parishes were established with their own needs for revenue and its collection. It necessitated a more complex definition of the taxing process. While enslavement was not fully codified in Virginia and in other states by the General Assembly until about 1705, as early as 1629, an act passed the House of Burgesses declaring that all, including masters of the family, all freemen working the ground, African Americans and indigenous people, both male and female, over 16 years of age, were replaced on tithable lists. Now, where were these tithable lists actually held? In churches. The churches is where they actually kept the tithable list, where they accounted for who the community would be able to tithe. They were collected by the government structure, divided amongst the government, the county, and the churches, but they were read and they were made sure that they were made public in the annals of these parishes and churches. Between the 1st and last of June, heads of households were required to return a list of all tithable people to the clerk of the county and the head of the parishes to be recorded, and it was posted in each parish for this yearly taxation to be paid to the government, the county, and the parishes. The effect of associating this tithable work with African American women was unique and actually set the discourse for the stratification of African American females outside of their femininity and their equal womanhood with English women. It tied them to difficult agricultural labor. There was no similar taxes at all levied on white womanhood. Tithable law helped erode African people's access to freedom by increasing the cost of being free. It required a certain amount of production by all Negro men and women. It increased English control over African labor. It disallowed financial solvency over even those that were quasi-free under indentured servitude. Financial solvency was one of the major obstacles for indentured and free African Americans in the first years of the colonies. Tithable laws threatened people's ability to stay out of debt, influenced decision about entering into marriage, and selection of marriage partners. Tithable laws helped erode African people's access to freedom. Again, it cost them to be free. The tithable law presumed that all African women would and always would work the land, casting social classes differentials among Virginians and New Jerseyans based on nationalities and ethnicities. The profits from these tithes directly supported the intertwined growth of the colonial government and the establishment of the Church of England and the Evangelical faith as an institution. It should be noted that religious denomination did not exemplify or exempt anyone from paying into these tithes, regardless of the denomination of the faith of the individual that was being tithed. They still had to tithe to the church and the parishes. Declarations of African women as tithable also affected their marriage possibilities and choices. Masters, or those that were masters of enslaved African women, paid the tithes for these women. But it also meant that they worked them even harder to be able to garner enough money and a agricultural access to be able to pay those tithes. It made them beasts of labor as they were seen in the colonial Americas. A free African woman had to pay her own tithes to remain free and to remain out of debt. This is a time of debtor's prison and need not even begin to account or recount, which we all know would end up being the discourse and the reality for African American women who were free, precariously free, that were not able to meet the demands of the tithe with ever increasing numbers of taxation based on the growth of the government and the church. If she was married, the expense fell on her husband, making marriage between free Africans an expensive proposition. In 1662, the General Assembly decreed an act that made certain colonial officers exempt from paying the parish tithable tax and exempted Anglican ministers from paying the public portion. In 1643, poor persons, free white colonists, who were unable to work in all of the colonies due to infirmity or age, were relieved of the county tax. Though it is left up to the individual and county or courts to determine who will be exempted. It is probably safe to assume that these exemptions only made those who were unable to work. I just want to end this here. African and indigenous men and women were never made exempt in any circumstances. Nevertheless, when we consider the question and the response of the African community, when we think about Black resistance on the imposition of these policies, in spite of the burden of labor imposed by the tithing laws that happen in all the colonies, laws that we often do not account for or think about when we talk about the formations of this nation, the high value that African men and women placed on family and kinship led to them entering into long-term contracts collectively to raise and share additional tobacco crops to pay for their community families' freedom, most especially for the freedom of women. We don't often think about enslavement in the colonial period. We often think about enslavement following the Revolutionary War. But the creation of enslavement under the colonial period is actually the most longest period. The tithable system and the income it generated for the church and the government lasted for more than 150 years, from 1623 through the end of the Revolutionary War. When the colonies became independent after the Revolutionary War, the tax system changed significantly. And then we begin to see the entering of income and property taxes for the first time in our nation. But before that, it was on the backs of enslaved labor.
Thank you so much, Dr. James Harris. You are given a lesson in here today. You can see me over here taking notes. This is really valuable. And I want to thank you particularly for making real my promise that we would be specific in our discussion today of harms, that we would be specific when we talked about how religious organizations benefited from or supported slavery. And what you've just outlined for us is exactly what I'm talking about. Here you have the sort of parish churches, the primary parish churches, not only taking an equal share, right, a per capita share of revenue that the colony is getting, but you also have the religious organizations and the churches holding on to the records and being sort of the middle person, the middle institution, the middle organization that helps the state initially the colony, later the states, to make slavery real in the lives of all of these people. So thank you so much. We absolutely appreciate this. I want to now ask our colleague, Reverend Carolyn Patterson. Reverend Patterson, we are super excited to hear from you today. And my question may seem a little rudimentary, but I think it's helpful for me, and it's definitely if there are young people that are joining us, it will be helpful for them. Let's go back to the very beginning. When, where does slavery actually begin in the colony of New Jersey?
Thank you so much, Dean Henderson. As you said earlier, very humbly, that you were the least important person here. I am so honored to be amongst the other people on this panel and yourself, and I'm just delighted for this opportunity to share a little bit. I want to talk about answer your question and talk about the resistance, because our committee is Faith and Black Resistance. So it all got started in the 17th century when Dutch people trafficked Africans here to develop the colony of New Netherland, which is now the state of New York. And Perth Amboy was the major port of entry where most Africans arrived from the Caribbean. What I find fascinating is almost anywhere we go in the state of New Jersey, there is an imprint of slavery. From 1737 up until about 1800, the enslaved population tripled, started out at close to 4,000 and grew to more than 12,000. And the highest concentrations of enslaved people were in Bergen, Monmouth, and Somerset counties. In Monmouth, they worked at Tinton Falls. 20% of the enslaved population lived in Bergen County, and many stayed close to their point of entry, which was Perth Amboy, which is now Middlesex and Somerset counties. New Jersey's economy, as was stated in the film at the beginning and by my colleagues, thrived because of the unpaid labor of enslaved Africans who worked plantations. Plantations were up here, up south. New Jersey is known as the slave state. Small farms were known as the garden state. Urban workshops, mines, and especially at the ports. Resistance was cultural, spiritual, and physical. Culturally, in private, enslaved people called one another by their given African names, rather than the names that their so-called slave owners gave them. And they also went to great lengths to keep in touch with their family, as Dr. Stephanie just said, despite separation through sales to other plantations and slave owners. Spiritually, African religious traditions were connected to nature and often practiced out in the open air. Hush harbors and ring shouts happened outside of the church house and in secret. And this is why the church at the time of slavery is referred to as the invisible institution, because much of the true religion happened outside of the owner's eye. There was a physical revolt in Somerset County in 1734. 30 enslaved men vowed to each, quote, rise at midnight, cut the throats of their masters and sons. But their plans were foiled because of an informant. 5 years later, there was an individual act of defiance in the Rocky Hill section of Somerset County when an enslaved man was ordered by the overseer's wife to fetch wood and make a fire. It's reported that this enslaved man had a surly tone when he said, "I'll make enough fire." He killed the overseer's son and burned a barn, destroying more than 1,000 bushels of grain. Multiple instances of enslaved people fighting their so-called masters back in self-defense have also been documented. Many of these enslaved people were later beaten, maimed, and some were burned alive. But there's one particular story about a 20-year-old named Sylvia Dubois, who decided that this was the day that she was no longer going to be beat by her so-called mistress. And Sylvia knocked the enslaver down and beat her to near death before she ran away. Sylvia was later contacted by the mistress with the message, "You have been set free." In 1741, an attempt to destroy New York City by some enslaved people and a band of white co-conspirators spread into Bergen County. And in Hackensack, a band of enslaved men assaulted their masters with axes, poisoned them, and set 7 barns on fire. Not all resistance was violent, though. The reason I wanted to point these out, I'm not promoting violence, but we have been fed this myth of the docile enslaved person for so many years. I think it's important to say that fight back was in the genes. But not all resistance was violent. There was nonviolent practice of self-emancipation. And Prime's story from the video is one such nonviolent practice going through the legislature. Running away was the most common method of escape from the brutalities of chattel slavery. And slave catchers were this country's earliest form of police. No matter what country Africans were taken from, they all asserted sovereignty over their own bodies. They knew that they were human, regardless of what capitalism did by creating another race. And they resisted enslavement aggressively through violence and sabotage, and passively by way of escape. So I'm pleased for the opportunity to talk about resistance culturally, spiritually, and physically.
Thank you so much, Reverend Carol. You know, I was thinking as you were describing some of those resistance practices, that another resistance practice that enslaved folks in New Jersey and elsewhere across North America engaged in was these sort of secret religious homes that you talked about, the hush harbors and the ring shops. This sort of the idea that true religion was one that could only be practiced outside of the master's gaze.
Yes.
And that spirit, that true religion spirit, moves into the 19th century in New Jersey before emancipation, as free Black people are able to establish actual incorporated churches in some of the towns. And so with the growth of some of those incorporated churches, you have an opportunity for Black people to be religious leaders and to do so sort of above board, if you will, within the confines and the relative safety of their own organizations. And when we're talking about some of those Black congregations that Reverend Boyer even mentioned earlier, some of the AME congregations, even, you know, churches like Witherspoon Presbyterian Church, Witherspoon Avenue Church in Princeton. When we're talking about some of these churches, we're talking about churches where Black people were able to exercise not only freedom from the horrors of what slavery in this state looked like and felt like, that legal regime, but also they were able to become property owners. They were able to be property custodians. They were able to assist with the Underground Railroad. They were able to really leverage their religious faith to serve these broader community goals. And that's a resistance story, right?
Absolutely.
That's the nonviolent side of a resistance story. And I think it's important. So thank you so much for teeing that up for us. I am super excited to turn to Imam Sharif. And Imam Sharif, I know you and we've talked about this before, and I get super excited when we talk about it. I'm hoping that you can share a little bit about some of the characteristics of people who were brought here as enslaved folks in New Jersey. And why is that relevant to a conversation about faith and Black resistance? Sort of who are these folks and what did they bring with them when they arrived?
With God's name, the merciful benefactor, the merciful redeemer. Dean Henderson, it's certainly a pleasure to be with you and the team of advisors that we have here. I want to first of all thank also the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice and all of the members of the council here. It's a pleasure and honor and a privilege to be with you. Let me take a big, step back in terms of looking at the history. It is estimated that approximately 30% of the Africans that were brought to the Americas came from either Muslim societies, Muslim families, or communities that were related to Islam. Now, that's a very significant number because they came here with a faith. They came here with a certain kind of orientation for life. And many of the Africans who were enslaved were familiar with slavery from their cultural and societal experience. But as Dr. Sylvian Juf writes in her book, The Servants of Allah, African Muslims Enslaved in the Americas, she says, how the Muslims viewed slavery, what form it had in Africa, and how one became a slave and how a slave could become free, offer important clues to understanding how Muslims would live and react to their own enslavement in a foreign Christian land. This was something new to them in terms of how they were identified as chattel of another human being for the rest of their life. That was something new because they understood that there was no connection to slavery with respect to the race or the color, and that there was no such thing as being in servitude to another human being for the rest of your life, because in Islam, we're not servants of people, we're servants of Almighty God. And so this is an important distinction that I think is to recognize where a lot of this resistance came from. Many of the rebellions that were identified that came from those who were enslaved were led in many instances by the Muslims who had been enslaved, because they resisted this whole attitude of them being told that they were inferior and they had to serve another human being for the rest of their life. The interesting part also is that the Quran and the Bible also speak about the importance of the freedom of the human being. They differentiate between the importance of the human being pious to Almighty God, and that the distinction of the human being is not in the color of their skin, but in the piousness that one has in regard to consciousness for God. In the beginning of our history, as one writer wrote, their eyes were watching God. And I think that is the key to one of our freedom movements, is the fact that we had the faith that God would come and remove us from this chattel slavery that we were placed in. I want to make one note about one individual that is noted in the history of New Jersey. His name was Yaf, and he was known to have been enslaved in Tinton Manor, as Dr. Carolyn, I believe, Patterson mentioned. He was enslaved in what is known as Pinebrook today. He was known as Yaf, and he was born in Barbados and enslaved in Africa by enslaved African parents. Linguists suggest that his name is common among the people of Senegambia, and the Monmouth University professor Julius Adekunle, he suggests that the name Yaf comes from the Muslim name Yusuf. Now, this name Yusuf is very important for us to recognize, because Yusuf means Joseph in the Bible. And Joseph was the man who had been imprisoned, right? And he had actually served in prison, and eventually he was freed, and he became what is considered to be the minister of all the warehouses within the kingdom that he was in. It is interesting to note that this man, Yaf, who resided in New Jersey and enslaved in New Jersey, was owned by a man called Lewis Morris. He chose Yaf to be his personal attendant because Yaf had learned English and interacted with many individuals and could represent an intellectual expression coming from his owner. He actually also began to interact with many of the influential men that were in New Jersey as well as outside of New Jersey. Upon Morris's death, he actually bequeathed Yaf to one of the Quakers that is well known as one of the founding members of this country, William Penn, the noted founder of Pennsylvania. And according to Penn's biographer, Andrew A. Murphy, William Penn owned many slaves, and despite the fact that he was identified as a Quaker, he displayed no sign of a troubled conscience over it. He said that even the economic gain and the luxury derived from the labor of slaves took precedent over an incipient moral scruples about the practice of slavery. Yaff spent approximately a half a century serving the richest man in New Jersey at the time, Colonel Lewis Morris. He served that man 50 years. And my question is, where is the benefit that comes from this man's 50 years of service to the wealthiest man that resided in New Jersey at the time? We have to ask ourselves a question. Is there a debt that is owed the children of those ancestors who provided the labor, both physical, mental, and spiritual, that facilitated the growth of the wealthiest people in this particular state, and actually established the founding strength of the United States of America? The reparations that we're talking about today, they should be used to reestablish the history of the African American people and restore the ethical principles of industriousness within our communities. Many historical religious institutions in the United States, as well as in New Jersey, engaged in and benefited from the enslaved African people. Many of those institutions, they benefited from the labor that was provided for the structure of the United States as well as New Jersey. We have to understand that the institutions of higher learning received financial gain due to the slave labor and served to benefit that institution, where in fact many of them deprived African Americans from even entering into the doors of those institutions. This country identifies itself as having a recognition of inalienable rights, rights that no human being, no government, or no institution should be in a position to take. And that includes the African American people, who have natural rights that have been bestowed upon them by their Creator. The Bible that preceded the Quran says, "Can a man rob God?" Many of you are familiar with those words. Can a man rob God? When in fact, this country has a historical record of robbing God of a whole people. And I think it's time for this country to recognize that there is a debt that must be paid for robbing God and robbing other human beings of the rights that Almighty God has given them.
Thank you so much, Imam Sharif. That's powerful. I think one of the things that I take from that, I take two things from what you just articulated. One is the idea of robbing God of a whole people and keeping God's wisdom from people, from humans who could benefit, and instead twisting the idea of God and twisting God's words to in fact continue to support and prop up an illegitimate system from the very beginning. The second thing that I take is this question of what is due to the descendants of Yaf. What is due to those enslaved people who served folks like William Morris or anyone else who amassed great wealth here in New Jersey without any regard for the humans that were enslaved behind their walls? So what is due to these populations? And I think this is a conversation that we will continue to come back to, sort of how do we articulate those person-to-person harms, and how do we articulate the state's role, right? The state and the municipal and local and county governments. How do we articulate the harms that those levels of government perpetuated, as well as those more interpersonal perpetuated harms? It's critically important. So thank you so much for this, Imam. Next, we are going to hear from our colleague, Reverend Tim Atkins-Jones. Reverend Tim, welcome, welcome, welcome. The question for you, Reverend Tim, really moves us forward. And it is a question that may seem entirely too broad for the 5 minutes that they have allotted for us today. But that is, why is reparations an issue of faith? Given everything that we've talked about the role and complicity of some religious organizations and denominations, and about the robbing of true religion from folks because of white supremacy, why is now the issue of reparations one of faith?
Dean Henderson, thank you so much for leading us thus far, and for everyone on the committee and the Institute and all those that have gathered. I'm glad to be able to offer now what I think of as a kind of clarion call after hearing so much of the history, specifically for us here in New Jersey, and even with a broader lens about how we've gotten to this place and how faith communities have been in some ways complicit and also resisting what has happened to us. I want to suggest that as we think about justice work, it is not uncommon for us to view so many of the things that we fight for through a faith lens. Many of the clergy and lay folk that are on this call, certainly on this panel, and that are gathered on this call more broadly, we've worked together over the last couple of years on any number of things that we would understand to be faith issues, whether it be about housing or any discrimination in all kinds of forms, healthcare debates, economic development. So much of our work is framed as justice issues. How often have you heard someone, a clergy folks, say at some point, quote Micah 6:8, right? What does the Lord require of me but to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with our God? And so I think we're clear that justice work is faith work. But what somehow is less clear is reparations as part of that justice work, as part of that faith work. And so when we call for justice, we can't say simply that we want to halt harm, but we have to work to heal the harm that has been caused. I'd say that is at the heart of an actual call for justice, more than just ending harm, but a healing of the harm, which by definition means repairing that harm, which literally means reparations. I'm reminded of the story of Joseph. Many remember Joseph in the coat of many colors, and he is sold into slavery. And it says in Genesis 37:23 through 25, and I'll paraphrase, that when his brothers have sold him off, they stripped him of his robe, and they took him and they threw him in a cistern. And then it says that they went and sat down to eat their meal. And that has always struck me because his brothers just caused this great harm to their brother. But then they have enough wherewithal to be able to go and to sit and to eat a meal. And I think that when we consider reparations, there are a lot of us and a lot of faith communities that are sitting down and eating their meals and ignoring the pain and the harm that has been caused, that we've heard about historically here, and that needs to be repaired. And so my job, I think that after hearing so many incredible presentations tonight, is just to implore, particularly the folk of faith. This is for everyone, but I want to make a particular appeal to people of faith to see and to understand the work of reparations as a faith issue. For our Black church members, who Black theology is such a center of so much of what we do, and we use the Exodus story as a grounding story. When we tell that story, let our people go, and use those words of liberation, we often forget what happens in Exodus 3, that as they were leaving, it says, I will bring this people into such favor with the Egyptians that when they go, you will not go empty-handed, right? Each woman shall ask her neighbor and any woman living in their neighbor's house for jewelry and silver and gold and clothing, and they shall put them on your sons and your daughters, and so you shall plunder the Egyptians. And I know plunder is a word that we may be uncomfortable with, but nonetheless, the notion of being restored and giving back after pain has been given is central to the notion of liberation. Because again, it's not just about halting the harm, it's about healing the harm that has been caused as well. There's certainly many other examples of that in the Hebrew Bible, but one that becomes central to me in Acts chapter 2, when they give this great picture of the church in Acts 2. It says that everybody shared and have everything in common. It's this beautiful sort of communal understanding of what life looks like together in community. But for there to be a place where everybody had everything in common, there had to be some giving up, right? That somebody had to give up something in order for everyone to have what they need. And when we look specifically at the history of what has happened here in New Jersey, it behooves us then, and it behooves communities of faith to recognize that our justice work is incomplete if we aren't making a concerted call for reparations. And I know that some of the faith partners at the Institute have been championing that cause for a couple of years now, but it's my hope that it will continue to catch on, and that because of the other subcommittees of this beautiful panel can't make that same sort of ethical, moral, and theological appeal that we can. And so I think one of our unique contributions to this work is to be able to center this work of reparations in the ethics and the morals and the theological tendencies of faithful folk here in New Jersey. And so I'm excited for this conversation to continue to kick off and for it to take greater root in all of our houses of faith all around our great state.
Thank you so much, Reverend. I really appreciate this call for folks of faith and really for everyone to remember that there is no stopping of harm. There is no ethical stopping of harm that does not think about repair, that does not think about healing, and sort of what that might mean for all of us. I also want to applaud again. I know this came up earlier, but I want to applaud the faith partners that are working with the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. For folks who may not be familiar, the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice has convened this council. This is a nonprofit organization that's convened this council and is really relying on the wisdom and the shared leadership of faith partners across the state. Those faith partners across the state are, we think, going to be critically important in putting pressure on the state legislature, on the governor to take seriously the need for serious study as well as serious appropriation of resources that can be used to address some, never all, but some of the harm that we have been talking about, not only in this committee, but in the other committees that are currently working. I want to, of course, first thank all of our committee members who have been sharing some of their work, some of their research, and some of their expertise. We know that this is hard work. And when I say that it is hard, what I mean is, yes, it's challenging to sort of to do this research, to do research at all is challenging. But it's especially challenging to do this type of work, this type of research in the records that we have, because the history of slavery in this country is so bloody and so painful that when we go to these records, this is hard work. This is heart and soul work. This isn't just we're sort of pulling books off the shelves and pulling records out of the bins. This is really, there's blood on these pages. And when we open up these records and actually share with folks the research that we've done, the research that other folks have been able to put together, I hope folks understand that this is work that takes a lot out of people. And so I want to thank our committee members for all of your efforts, for everything that you've shared, recognizing that this is not an easy path, and we value what you have shared. I think for as we move into the public portion of our meeting today, I just want to sort of remind us of where we started. We started really with talking about specific examples of how faith organizations and leaders in the state of New Jersey, first in the colony of New Jersey, benefited from and supported the enslavement of Black people in the state. I told you at the beginning that when we talk about this, we were going to talk broadly, and I think we did so tonight. So thank you to our panelists for keeping our view broad and not letting us get too small with our thinking. The organizations and the religious faith organizations in the state who not only enslaved Black people as organizations, so people who were slaves of the church, but also trafficked in Black Black flesh, they sold Black people. They benefited from tax dollars that were derived from the labor of enslaved Africans. They benefited from the tithes that were paid by free Africans on behalf of themselves. All of this is sort of part of the harms that we're talking about, right? This sort of universe, this mosaic of harms. All of these are part of that, and I think it's important for us to remember sort of this is the confrontation stage, right? We're still confronting this history, much of which I hope has been informative for all of you. With that, I am turning over, and I should add, we are so excited about the robust conversation that's happening in YouTube. I had a note, don't forget to mention how excited we are. We are so excited about the robust conversation that's happening on YouTube. Thank you for the folks that are holding space there to not only ask questions, but also to be critical and to sort of to give the input, the public input that we are seeking, and that will make this effort one that is grounded in the knowledge and the histories of the people that are here in the state. So thank you so much for that, for your time and your contribution to that. With that, I'm turning it over to Jean-Pierre, who will lead us into our public portion of the evening.
Thank you so much, Tajania, for doing such a wonderful job moderating. I just want to reiterate once again, thank you so much to the Faith and Black Christians Committee. That was extremely powerful, very insightful, very invigorating, and I think a lot of folks are going to come away with a very particular, unique knowledge base after that. I do want to say before we move on to where I discuss a little bit about the parameters for the public comment portion, I do, because of your insights were so powerful and so inspiring, I do just want to reflect briefly on what you all said. I think so much of the time when we discuss reparations, we tend to limit the discussion to the accrual of harms. And yet we don't talk about the other side of the ledger, which you all talked about, the benefits that accrued over time from slavery. And there must be a reckoning with both the harms and with the benefits. There could be no New Jersey. There could be no US without slavery, both materially and in terms of intangibles. What the historian Eben Morgan points out in American Freedom, in American Slavery and American Freedom, but also what the inimitable W.B. Du Bois calls the wages of whiteness. And I think it's particularly poignant that we invoke one of Du Bois's most famous admirers. We are entering the long weekend to celebrate his birthday and to celebrate his legacy, Dr. King. Many celebrations that have gone on and will go on this weekend will circumscribe his work. His civil rights and voting rights, which are incredibly important, but are only one aspect of his work. I want to remind you that we must look to the radical king, the king in the wilderness, or as King reminded everyone, that was who he was since day one, a seeker of truth, a trumpet of conscience, which was grounded in his faith. King who called out the harms and the benefits of slavery that were bound together. This is the king who called for a reckoning with America's history of slavery, who called for reparations, particularly his work, Why We Can't Wait, who wanted to abolish poverty. King had a future-oriented understanding of reparations, that in order to realize Black freedom and in order to establish a beloved community, he called for not only a reconstruction, but a revolution in values for this country, one that would establish his beloved community and a path toward genuine economic justice and freedom. So I want you to keep that in mind as you hear about celebrations of King, as you hear about his life and his work. Keep the radical King in mind. King's commitment to the truth, to reparations, and to freedom that's unbounded. It is now time for the public comment portion. I know the committee looks forward to your comments and have your thoughts inform their work going forward. Thank you to those of you who have previously submitted comments. We really appreciate it. We had an overwhelming response, and we hope to hear from you today. Some folks have submitted pre-recorded comments as well. If you have comments that extend beyond 3 minutes, please feel free to use the website ngoreparations.org. There you can submit audio, video, or written comments. There you can express yourself as you see fit. So I just want to reiterate, these are the rules for public comment portion. As pointed out in the Zoom instructions, for those who previously registered to speak, we will call out the names of the co-directors. We'll call out the names of those who have registered. There will be a timer on the upper right. You will have 3 minutes to speak. I will give you a 15-second warning. There will be a 10-second grace period after 3 minutes, and then you will be muted. No exceptions. Like I said before, if you would like time to express yourself even further, please go to the website. Finally, for an important disclaimer, I just want you to keep this in mind. We do not tolerate hate speech, personal attacks, or threats of any kind, and will be promptly removed from this meeting. So now I want to pass it over to our co-directors, Reverend Tim and Reverend Boyer, to moderate this portion.
Thank you so much, Jean-Pierre. I also just want to say thank you for noting the radical king. I tend to get very cynical and really upset around King Holiday just because I have to look out and see so many folk quoting King that don't, whose actions don't reflect his legacy at all. So thank you for raising that, particularly in a conversation in and around reparations. And so we have some folk that are already, that have gone through this list and folk who have already signed up for public comment. So I want to call out our first couple of speakers. Reverend Anya is first up, and she'll be followed by Diane P. Hawkins. Good to see you, Reverend Anya, as always.
Wonderful to see you. And I want to start with gratitude, thanks, and blessing to all of the panelists. Just incredible, incredible work. Grateful for you, and may God keep you. So I'm Reverend Anya Samler-Michael. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the senior co-minister at the Unitarian Universalist Congregation at Montclair. And as I share today, I want to acknowledge that I have learned a great deal from the work of our institution, a document that was put out called Widening the Circle of Concern, which calls for reparations in our Unitarian Universalist Association. And some of what I share, of course, draws from that. As Unitarian Universalists, we are behooved to look inward at our own history of oppression and exploitation of Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color, and we are behooved to study and learn our complicitness in white supremacy and Christian supremacy, and then speak those truths and correct those sins. We can see and we must see how practices such as missionary colonialism and religious oppression, such as the use of Christianity to erase African culture, is present in our own faith association and our own congregations. And we must acknowledge that Protestant theological thought, from which we are in part drawn from our faith community, conflated European identity with Christianity, and conflated European identity with righteousness and purity, and developed the concept of whiteness, inversely establishing an anti-Blackness. And we need to bear witness to the history of our faith institution as an institution that created, that maintained, and that cultivated cultural ideas that are wholly complicit with racism, anti-Blackness, and white supremacy culture. And while Unitarian Universalism does have a history of resisting slavery, of supporting abolition, of resisting the Fugitive Slave Act, and supporting the Civil Rights Movement, it also has a history of complicity with and support for prohibition, which has, from my opinion, been correctly called a white lash of rural middle-class white evangelicals disciplining the leisure of America's growing urban immigrant and African-American communities. And Unitarian Universalism has a history of complicity and support of eugenics, which errantly sought to plan breeding to purify or perfect human beings along racist lines. So we need a true accounting that is national and also one that is local. And we need to commit to and then do the work of repair. Here's what I see we need to do, and hopefully what we are beginning to do as a congregation and as a community of Unitarian Universalists. We need resources. They need to be redirected towards investments that will accomplish reparations, sparing the truth, and transforming our culture and practice, directing Directing those resources to inclusion, diversity, and equity and risks must be borne by our systems and institutions and not just by individuals. Risks need to be borne by white leaders, not only Black leaders. Risks need to be taken by those that have received the benefit for years of institutional and systemic racism.
Thank you, Reverend.
Next up is Diane Hawkins. And Diane will be followed by Lori Score, excuse
me. Is this the one and only Diane Hawkins from the NAACP?
Oh, I'm sorry, I just got word that Diane's no longer speaking. Lori, thank you for being ready.
Thank you. My name is Lori Schuldiner-Shore. I have training as a city planner and as a lawyer, and I am a pro bono mediator for New Jersey County Courts. Before I retired 2 years ago, I worked for the Claims Conference. The Claims Conference is the chief global negotiator on behalf of the Jewish population, with the chief global negotiator with Germany, which has successfully secured reparations and restitution on behalf of Jewish Holocaust survivors since the early 1950s and continuing to this very day. I am Jewish and I am white, and I routinely ask myself, who am I in these conversations? I believe that it's my responsibility to be an ally in reparations advocacy. I was raised in Camden, New Jersey in the 1960s. I'm the child of 2 Holocaust survivors. I believe that the decades-long Holocaust reparations program can serve as a guide for those seeking reparations for enslavement and its aftermath in the United States. Here are some key points that I have learned about the operations of a reparations program in which I was involved professionally. Number 1, you have to start somewhere, and the starting point is not the ending point. Number 2, define who is eligible. Recognize that this may well expand after you see who is submitting successful claims and who is submitting unsuccessful claims for reparations. For example, in the case of someone looking for housing discrimination reparations, if someone who applied for a mortgage but was refused would be eligible to receive reparations, then what do you do with the person who knew that it wasn't even worth applying for the mortgage? When you recognize that someone like that would not be eligible, you start to expand the eligibility requirements. It's a fluid process, but as I said, you have to start somewhere so that in fact you can expand. Next, the process has to have integrity and it has to have transparency. A solid program must give the benefit of the doubt to the claimant and at the same time provide proper supports to verify claims, such as making sure that there are historians and researchers who are in fact available to help the claimants. Next, the process should be compassionate and should respect the applicants and their trauma-informed life experience.
15 seconds.
Bottom line, don't allow the evolution or the mystery to inhibit the start of the process. Let's start. And with that, really applause to the work of this council. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I think as we continue to engage, it's getting started, I think, is one of the hardest issues. And even as people of faith think about reparations, I think one of the roadblocks is where to begin and how to begin and who is included, et cetera. So thank you for that, for some for guidelines as we move in. Next up, we'll have Annette Buchanan, and they'll be followed by Barbie Bach.
Good evening, all. My name is Canon Annette Buchanan, and I'm a lay leader from the Episcopal Diocese of New Jersey. I'm co-chair of the Reparations Commission and co-convener of the New Jersey Faith Allies for Reparations, Say the Word. Our diocese, with over 130 churches, was founded in 1785. Our oldest church, St. Peter's South Amboy, Perth Amboy, was founded in 1615. and has the first Black voter under the 15th Amendment buried in its graveyard. As such, we have deep pre-colonial and colonial history and have documented evidence of direct complicity of many of our bishops, priests, and congregants in the institution of slavery in New Jersey. In our diocese, we have about a dozen historical Black congregations, most of whom were formed due to segregation practices of our churches and municipalities. They are a living witness to our current history. Further, our Episcopal denomination, with over 100 dioceses within and beyond the USA, to varying degrees, are reviewing this reparation issue. And our governance structure, led by presiding Bishop Michael Curry, has started to work to create a separate entity funded through investment draw to address reparations and other justice issues. Globally, we are part of the Anglican Communion, spanning 160 nations, whose leadership is also wrestling with this issue. Many of us, including myself, have personally borne witness to our church building located on top of the slavery dungeons of the Cape Coast Castle in Ghana. The Church of England, under the leadership of Archbishop Justin Welby, acknowledged their complicity in the transatlantic slave trade, and with a forensic audit completed, have set up funds for restitution. As people of faith, we have a moral obligation to address this harm, hence the reason for our active engagement in the reparation movement. Our Reparations Commission in the Diocese of New Jersey was formed by resolution at our convention with overwhelming support. We have found the largest impediment to support is the lack of knowledge of our history. Once information of inequities is shared, there is a light bulb moment. Likewise, expanding reparation beyond a financial payout helps our congregants to address issues such as vitality, leadership development, and community outreach. We have held webinars, worship services, hired a research historian towards the goal of laying a solid foundation from which all reparation interactions can be held. Actively engaging and supporting the New Jersey Faith Allies as a justice-based coalition in the state of New Jersey is a critical form of our direct activism to ensure that justice prevails for the Black communities that have been disenfranchised by the state. We call on all people of good faith, especially our legislators, to support the New Jersey Reparations Task Force bills. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that robust, very powerful, in-depth analysis. Really look forward to talking to you some more, and some of our researchers may reach out to you for some of that documented history, which would be very helpful. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. Barbie, welcome.
Thank you. I am compelled to strive for reparative justice as a Christian and Japanese American, and as an anti-racism organizer for more than 3 decades. Several instances of Bible scripture instruct my faith tradition. From Ecclesiastes, pay to all what is owed them. From the Romans, let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another. And from the Psalms, the wicked borrows but does not pay back. Restitution for centuries of unpaid labor does not even begin to reckon additionally with the sinful crimes of kidnapping and dehumanizing captive and enslaved African peoples, and the hugely negative effects of the structural racist and oppressive hierarchy that has infected America throughout its history. In addition to paying a debt, when a wrong is committed, my faith tradition calls for us to respond with justice, to carry on Christ's work of reconciliation in the world, and to repair that which is broken, to restore all people to unity with God and each other. Government leaders knew the crimes they perpetuated in slavery were wrong, but have never been prosecuted. Yet since the time that freed slaves asked for pay, opposition to calls for reparations has been constant for more than 150 years. The dictionary definition for reparations is the making of amends for wrong, harm, or injury done. Reparative justice for military conflict and restitution for harmed peoples after a war have been routinely accepted as a necessary government process. but reparations for the effects of slavery have never been addressed, and anti-Black racism, a product of slavery, has never been interrupted. I cannot accept Mitch McConnell's statement that America should not be held liable for something that happened 150 years ago. None of us currently alive are responsible. But when the enslaved were freed in the late 1860s, they had less than nothing. And adjusted for today's money value and inflation, that is the same socioeconomic reality today. The first constitutional amendment in the Bill of Rights provides citizens the right to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Every Black American should take the demands of the 1969 Black Manifesto to government representatives who must acknowledge all citizen correspondence. I think that action is long overdue and would be relevant for the reparations movement. The process of Japanese Americans organizing for redress for wrongful government action resulted in a token payment to surviving individuals by the Civil Liberties Act of 1988. Many people who received a check, but the action was an insult. Reparations must involve societal and systemic transformation more than a check. Many Japanese Americans continue to this day to organize and support African Americans seeking reparations from the government for slavery and its legacy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Deeply appreciate that.
Next joining us will be Karina Sinclair. Karina will be followed by Daniel Tutt. Thank you.
I'm a lay member of the Morrow Memorial Methodist Church in Maplewood, New Jersey. Undeniably, slavery existed in the U.S. for some 400 years, and acceptance of slavery as morally right was widespread among the white population in the U.S. Christian churches generally condoned the practice. For example, during the 1800s, the Methodist churches in the South condoned it, and the Northern churches silently accepted it. White families generated profits thanks to the enslaved people's work in their plantations and other forms of businesses, and generated enormous wealth generation by generation. Compare that with the enslaved of Africans who were prevented from accumulating generational wealth over the same period. And when slavery finally was outlawed, they had no savings and no assets. Jim Crow made it even more difficult to earn a salary fairly. Redlining and other practices severely limited Black people's access to both loans and ability to buy real property. And as a result, Blacks and whites became geographically segregated. But because the churches did not actively work to abolish slavery in the past, but instead condoned it and economically benefited, they bear more responsibility for the ill effects and have an obligation to vigorously work to right the wrongs of the past on the lives of descendants of the formerly enslaved African Americans through reconciliation and reparations. The churches should work to make all Americans acknowledge that slavery did exist in the US and that reparations are needed. Reparations must be earnestly discussed so that groups of people who now live in and with crowded substandard housing, education, and medical care in highly polluted areas with high unemployment are given opportunities to equal living standards and opportunities for prosperous, healthy lives. Reparations must be acted upon. And inspirations can be had from Germany that has paid close to $90 billion to Holocaust survivors from 1945 till today, and from the South Africa's 1995 Truth and Reconciliation Commission, acknowledging that the wrongdoings of apartheid, and they paid reparations and rehabilitations. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Karina, next, Daniel Tuck.
Thank you.
Welcome, Daniel.
Thank you. I appreciate the speaker's previous, as well as the extensive knowledge shared, historical perspective and information I find myself continually, and this day being no exception, learning more and more of where we have been, where we have come from, and the importance of commitment to changing the course, including support of reparations. I am speaking tonight as a member of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Washington Crossing in Titusville, New Jersey. I speak with the support of our professional ministerial team, led by Reverend Kim Wildszewski, who's a part of the Faith Allies group, as well as a colleague of mine in the racial justice ministry at the church, Regina Podhorn, who's also a part of the Faith Allies group. And when I heard that neither of them would be able to give comment tonight, when I heard of that last week, I jumped in and said, I feel it's extremely important that our church be on record publicly in support of reparations. And what I'd like to share with you is just a bit of how we have approached the whole issue of, we are a predominantly white congregation in Titusville, New Jersey. I'm drawing on people from Pennsylvania and New Jersey because we're right along the Delaware River there. We've committed to a process. We have for decades have supported racial justice long before I was a member. And the mention of Dr. King, there's even a letter from him from the early 60s from some of the work some of our members had done in the voting rights arena. And I know Unitarians stood shoulder to shoulder. But we have come a long way, I think, in terms of our own education as a white congregation, even more so than in years past, to the point where we adopted a resolution that's similar to what is being considered by our larger denomination, the Unitarian Universalist Association, that centers anti-racism and justice work, including in the area of reparations. And I just want to share with you, because I look on it because of
10 seconds.
It's so easy to be in the sea of whiteness. Our candles that we light each Sunday morning, our church is working to build a race-conscious and multicultural community through our actions to dismantle racism and other intersecting oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. And we commit to the work of anti-racism and collective liberation. We're reminded of that every Sunday. Thank you for this time.
Thank you. Thank you for your commitment and passion. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Next, we'll have Deborah Duncan, and Deborah will be followed by Jimmy Small. Welcome, Deborah.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I live in South Jersey. When I first heard about the Salvation and Social Justice, I looked it up and was very impressed, but also a little surprised. Part of the mission was to engage Black churches in particular, but religious communities in social justice. And my reaction was, how can they not be involved in social justice? And I gave Reverend Boyer a tremendous amount of credit for the work that you have been doing, that everybody has been doing. And I really want to thank you for the momentum and the education that you have done. As you can tell from my hair, I'm an older person. And I remember participating in what at the time we called civil rights protests and marches and letter writing and community, organizing. I was in college, so I, worked with student groups. And then over the decades, I have seen those initiatives, fade. They were not long lasting, and gains that had been made, in fact, have been eroded. When the random killings of Black and brown people began to get mainstream focus. And then, of course, the horrendous murder of George Floyd was, broadcast all over. I began to see lots of different people, lots of different groups, institutions, organizations. People began to say, this is totally beyond comprehension. This cannot be ignored anymore. And that lifted my heart because I began to see more and more people really taking this seriously when, we've known, forever, and certainly the Black and brown communities have been living with this. So I've been gratified to see this happen. I see more people of all races and all economic brackets being motivated, but it is a definite challenge. And some of the things that we're talking about here tonight, need to
10
happen
seconds.
in our communities, in our churches, in our government offices. We need to keep this momentum going. And I thank all of you.
Thank you so much, Deborah, and thank you for your comments. Appreciate you. And I'll just super briefly say, Stockholm Syndrome and post-traumatic slave syndrome is very real within theology in many Black churches. I'll just leave that there.
Okay.
So much more to be said yet. Next up, Jimmy Small, and Jimmy will be followed by John Kular. Excuse me if I'm saying your name wrong, John, but Jimmy Small.
Good evening. I'd like to apologize. I missed most of this meeting because I'm president of the Eastern Orange Public Library Board, and we had a very long meeting that just ended. Well, anyway, slavery in this state didn't fully come to a closure until 1861. New Jersey passed a law in 1804, I think it was, that said slavery would end over time. So the last of the people that were actually enslaved was in 1861. And we do need reparations. We paid our Jewish brothers and sisters some money after World War II, and the same thing with our Japanese brothers and sisters. There's no reason that we can't do the same thing. It's often said that people are learning in colleges, especially in buildings built by slaves, and no one has ever received any financial remuneration, any financial givings to those people and the ancestors and the people that came after them to make sure that they were paid for things. No one, and it shouldn't be a problem. And other people in this state, I don't know of any other state, but if you name a town, you can name it by what people live there. I'm not going to do that, but that is true. This state, and when I was a little kid, I think ranked 54th as most segregated, which means we were behind some territories because there's 57 of them. So we were ranked near the bottom. So we have to make sure we push reparations for everyone that has been maligned and done wrong over the years, but especially our Black and brown people. But yet at the same time, if we believe in God, and I'm a Muslim as I should say, that I always like to say I want for my brother the same thing I want for myself. And brother does not mean a gender, it means a bit of humanity. And that's what I think for me reparations would be all about. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Small. And
you're welcome.
And I'll just a brief comment. The church I used to pastor before coming to Trenton is a historic church, been there for over 200 years. The street is now called Carpenter Street, where one of the old Negro schools was. But back in the day, that street was called Nigger Street, to the point that you was making. So this is real here in New Jersey.
Next, we have John Kular, and then be followed by Lawrence Walker.
Hey, how you doing, brother, man?
Doing well.
Yeah, my name is
not you pronounced it right. It's John Color. It's Kular, but I got a weird name. You know what I mean? Like my great grandfather in Jacksonville, Florida, name is Color. You know what I mean? The Color family is be deep in North and Central Florida. But I mean, just full disclosure, you know, like the majority of my people, like I'm a reparations lineage-based advocate. I didn't come here for any problems, but I just came here to just lay my case down. And I think I'm gonna tell you my family story in America and in New Jersey. And I just want to lay my case down. So, you know, in 1912, my great-grandfather Harold was born in Belleville, New Jersey. His parents came from Southern Georgia before the Great Migration. They came to Belleville. They were extremely discriminated against for years. And somehow they found a way to kind of, you know, in the 50s and in the 40s, when the civil rights movement started kicking up, they started getting things like government jobs. That's my paternal family. My mother's maternal family, they come from South Carolina. So so my great-grandmother raised my mother in Nutley, New Jersey. She's from South Carolina. Her mother was born a slave. They came here and they moved to a street in Nutley called Passaic Avenue. And if you know what Passaic Avenue is in Nutley, because people, oh, your mother's from Nutley. Yeah, because she's from Nutley because my great-grandmother was the first person in my family to obtain a college degree. You know, she came up here in 1920s, 1930s. She got a college degree. She went to Benedict College in South Carolina, got a degree for education. And she came up here for a better life, you know what I mean, with her husband, my great-great-grandfather, who's from Virginia, went to Philly first, and they came up here in 1920s, 1930s, came to Nutley, and she could not get any employment with her college degree, so she was a housemaid. You know, she was relinquished to taking care of white people's children and things like that, so they grew up on Passaic Avenue. And there's a lot of places like that in New Jersey. We go to these white places in New Jersey where it's like a black block, whether it be South Orange, whether it be Nutley, it's where they wanted to keep the domestic workers at, to keep them close. Like, you know, and that's where I come from, you know. And my whole thing with this thing is that I wish that you guys would bring up the Newark riots more. I think that this is the most significant thing that happened to Black people, the Newark riots, because I don't recall people talking about there were Latinos here, Puerto Ricans here, Caribbeans here, Africans here. My mother never talked about these people. My mother was born in 1955, you know, like, and she lived in Nutley, New Jersey, and there was a whole bunch of Italians there, and they were treating her like a mascot.
15 seconds.
Oh, wow. All right, well, all right, 15. All right. Well, my whole thing is this. My whole thing is that if you want to tie this claim to chattel slavery, then you have to connect to the people who descend from chattel slavery. I'm sorry, we have different ethnicities. We're Black. Our American story is different. My mother did not move here for a better life. My mother did not move here. We moved within our country because we're from this country, and we were freed by the 13th Amendment. It was let us to come here early, 1912. My family been in New Jersey for 100 years. So I feel like if you want to go about what you're going to do,
But well, thank you for those comments and thank you for your passion. One of the things that I think is in this particular committee, which is Faith and Black Resistance, you know, to your point, you know, and the narrow scope of some of what I think this committee is talking about is what does reparations look like from these faith denominations to these other faith denominations, which are in and of themselves American born and bred. So to your point, in the context of this committee anyway, I think that's a box check, but thank you.
Absolutely. I mean, there's no qualms with making sure that those, I mean, I think a lot of what we've centered our commentary on tonight has been about those that have received harm, having that harm repaired. And so that means it has to be those, you know, those that have experienced it indeed over time. So we appreciate you, John. Next, we have Lawrence Walker. And after Lawrence is Hanif Davis, and Hanif is our last person that signed up. So, Brother Lawrence, welcome.
Good evening. My name is Lawrence Walker. I'm president and CEO of Sankofa African American 3D Museum. We're the first virtual reality 3D museum in the country and around the world. I applaud this committee for putting together this forum, and I believe you're having further forums in the future. I'd like to point out three things. I think Reverend Boyd talked about it earlier, the role of the church. I must say the role of the church, like during the 1700s, Reverend Richard Allen of the AME Church was the first pastor of the AME Church. They used to call him during the 1700s CC Writers. Not too many people know what that means. It's a lot of rich history on Reverend Richard Allen. I'm surprised nobody has done a film on him yet. Hopefully that will happen. The second thing, if you move 100 years forward and talk about Thaddeus Stevens, some of you might have had saw the movie Lincoln about 10, 15 years ago. But Thaddeus Stevens in that movie, which was played by Tommy Lee Jones, he played that part. He should have got an Oscar for that because he played that part perfectly. But Thaddeus Stevens on the Senate floor in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and he said the same speech in Washington, D.C., and I quote you, either we pay these slaves the 40 acres and a mule, or your kids and your kids' kids will pay a dear price. And what Thaddeus Stevens, which was a powerful Republican, was talking about reparation. And now that 40 acres and a mule is in the trillions. So the time has come for reparation to be paid. And I must say, earlier, I think some of you had talked about the role of New Jersey. New Jersey and New York were the last two states to hold on to slavery. And in several pockets in the southern part of New Jersey, slaves didn't even know they were free from some of the research I read in the state libraries of New Jersey. Certain pockets of New Jersey, slaves didn't even know they were free until after the turn of the century. So that's all a part of reparation. And I'll end with this. We must give credence and praise to Reverend Richard Barber of Lincoln Church there in Somerset, New Jersey. He passed away of the COVID about 3 or 4 years ago. But he had a lawsuit in the state of New Jersey that not too many people know about, and he filed for reparation, and naturally the state threw it out. So I thank you for your time, and hopefully when I have some time, I will sit in on a lot more of these meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for that tremendously strong, valuable insights and intel. Thank you. And thank you for lifting up Richard Allen.
I knew Miami brother was going to point that out. Also, I have to say, brother Hanif is coming to be our last public commenter, but I just have to say, as someone who is a Southern transplant to New Jersey, I am continually amazed by some of the history, and I know the things that I assumed as a Southerner, particularly about how slavery operated. And so both today, but certainly in previous encounters, learning so much about New Jersey in particular has been so helpful. So Hanif, I want you to come and close out our public comments. Welcome.
And I want to thank you and the council. I really appreciate you guys doing this and putting this to the forefront. I really do mean that. But I'm going to get a little upset, so bear with me. It's never personal. But I'm getting a little disappointed that we're still doing this all blackness, which this reparations movement, specifically here in this state, is a Black American story. That's nothing against our brothers and sisters in the Caribbean or in Africa or Latin America. They have their own tragedies, but our story is different. We went through our Holocaust here, and we need that repaired, and we can't have it mixed with others. And again, they had their harms, and we're sorry. And we see, people in the Caribbean talking about holding England and other countries in Europe responsible, and that's great, but that should not be mixed with ours. In addition, the lady spoke about Japanese Americans. The Japanese Americans have reparations. They built back up Japan, and then they have built communities here in this country that we have not been able to build. We have been trying to build, and we've had a hard time doing that because we have so many barriers holding against us. And lastly, and this is specifically to the council, I still haven't heard how are you going to present this to Scutari and Coughlin? Listen, Scutari lives in Clark, and everybody knows the known history of Clark. And he has said on record to NJ.com, he knows nothing about reparations. If you bring him this with this all full blackness, he's going to find a way to get around it, because he's going to say that's not that what happened in Haiti is not, that's not New Jersey. He's going to find a way to get around it. And we have to make a case for our story here in America. Coughlin's the same way. He just slammed the door on the whole immigrant issue. And that's a whole nother topic that I'm not even going to touch. But we have to make sure the story is an American story, because it is an American horror story that we have had here. And I'm seeing a lot of other communities being mixed in with what we're talking about. And it's just kind of disappointing, because we never were able to sit on theirs and speak about, hey, what about our story back in the 1980s and the 1990s when Native Americans received theirs and Japanese and many other communities. But we need ours. We need it to be lineage based. And again, that is not an attack. Let me be clear. Not an attack on any other community. And I just want to make that clear. We have our story here. Please let our story be the forefront and the one that leads the way. Again, if any of you are ever in North Jersey, I'm Hattie's Food Truck. I have to serve the best barbecue in the state. I hope you guys come by. This is not a personal attack, Council. You guys are doing a great job putting this in the forefront, but we have to make sure we're doing right by Black Americans. Thank you again, sir. I appreciate you letting me speak.
Thank you. I mean, thank you for that. And thank you for your passion. I think I'm definitely going to look you up, take you up on that offer on the food truck and the barbecue. Again, I would just reiterate, particularly this group, this Faith and Black Resistance, and kind of what's being advocated for here, and very early on in the comments, if the Catholic Church, if the Catholic Diocese in New Jersey was to pay something, I would be advocating that it would go to some of these oldest Black congregations which emerged here in New Jersey. So again, I think that checks that box. I'm not speaking for the other committees, but I am speaking in terms of what was laid out here tonight in this specific space. And also just to what I heard tonight, and maybe I was off base, but I thought I was listening really well when we've had other folks share their reparation stories as examples and as certain lessons learned through their good, bad, ugly things that could be done better. And what I heard was people in support of exactly what you and the rest of us are advocating for, not as much trying to mix or take over as much as trying to support and trying to give some level of insight based off of what they've experienced in their quest and some successes and failures and reparations. But with that, I give it back to my good brother.
Oh, no, absolutely. That I agree and would sort of echo the sentiments. And I guess let me just say I'm grateful for all of the comments. There's certainly much more that could be shared. And as Jean-Pierre mentioned earlier, there are some other avenues to be able to continue this conversation. But we're so glad to be able to have this conversation tonight and to continue the work, because the work of our particular subcommittee doesn't end tonight. We're going to continue to work, continue to incorporate some of the things that we've heard and some of the things we're researching, and continue to allow that to be a part of the report that we ultimately will do when this is presented. I mean, this entire process with all of these committees is the result of a lack of satisfaction with the movement of our legislature and a decision to do this work on our own to then be able to bring forward. So I'm excited to continue the work and grateful for those that are with us tonight. I believe I'm turning it back over to Dean Henderson.
I'll take that, Lobby. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of our guests. I know Jean-Pierre is going to close us out. I just wanted to say thank you for our commenters and for everyone who has sort of rode with us this evening. This has been illuminating for me. I have been taking notes as we've been talking. I'm learning. I hope you are learning, and we hope to sort of use what we are collectively learning to push for exactly what some of our friends have been suggesting this evening. So thank you so much for your engagement and your participation. Jean-Pierre, on to you.
Thank you so much, Tajania. And actually, before we close it out, since we do have a little bit of time, I do want to give some of the other members of the committee, if you would like, if you have any reflections, any themes that came out, any closing comments on the public comments before I close it out, because many of the comments were very generative. If you want to reflect, now is the time to do so before I close it out for the evening.
Thank you, Jean-Pierre. I want to thank everybody who offered public comment for taking the time tonight for participating. And I want to point out to those who say that this is a Black America thing, that even in my presentation, I pointed out many of the enslaved people who were brought here were brought from the Caribbean. So we can't think that we can divide who's Black and who's not and who's included. It's anyone who is a descendant of someone who was enslaved. And that's how most of us are here.
Anyone else from the committee want to make any statements before we head out for the evening? All right. If not,
just one final comment.
Oh yes. Okay, Imam, please.
There is a verse in the Quran that I would just like to leave with you, where Almighty God says, "Seek with all the resources that I have given you the home of the destiny, but do not forget your share of the material world." And I think that's what we're looking for. We're looking for our share of the material world that has been robbed from us and denied of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Imam Sharif, for leaving us with his words, and thank you, Reverend Carroll. I want to say once again, thank you so much to the Faith and Black Resistance Committee. Thank you to Tashania for your wonderful insights for this wonderful evening. And I also want to thank all of you for attending and taking time out of your evening to attend this and to learn as much. I got so much out of this. And I hope you look forward to the actual written work that is produced by this committee and by the council. Many of the issues that you raise will be addressed in their work, right? This is an ongoing process. And even when that committee, the final report is produced, that is still part of the ongoing process. The work will continue. And we will require your energy and your support to realize reparations, both here in New Jersey and in the US and across the world. So keep that in mind. And I just want to say, please be on the lookout for the next flyer for the next public session and all the materials. Be on the lookout on your social media. That will be, once again, February 8th at 6:30. That will be hosted by the Health Equity Committee. I look forward to seeing you all then. But now, in the meantime, take it easy and have a good evening, everyone. Thank you so much.